My name is Judy Showalter, and today is March 5th, 2008. We are here with Aldrich Forrest, class of Randolph-Macon 1932. Mr. Forrest graduated in chemistry and then went on to have a career as a wholesaler in seafood, and has had a long and distinguished service to the college. Also with us today are Lori Preston, Susan Donovan, and Sarah Hendricks. Thank you for letting us come today, Mr. Forrest. We appreciate it.
Well, I appreciate you coming.
Can you tell us how you first heard about Randolph-Macon College?
Well, you have to go back a long ways, 80 years ago. Pocosin was a little town of about 1,200 people, a little fishing village, truck farmers. And we were all Methodists. This part of the community was strictly Methodist. And at that time, Randolph-Macon had a close relationship with the church. I think the thing that really influenced me to go was a man named C. Trainum Toppin, who was on one in the ministry. When he got out of school, he taught high school for a couple of years, and I happened to be in his classes. And I expect he influenced me more to go to Randolph-Macon than anybody else. Although we had in the community at that time, we'd had Dr. Hunt, two Dr. Hunts, Frank and Ben, and a Reverend Carol Freeman, who had gone around Randolph-Macon. But I don't suppose then there was probably, when I was a child, there was probably 1 or 2 people that had gone to college in this area. It was a very rural area, very rural. Just a small country village. But Trainum, I think, influenced me. He was a fine man, and when he retired, he moved back here, and we went fishing together, and I enjoyed it.
So when you first got to Ashland, can you tell us what your first impression of the school was? Had you been there before you came as a student?
No, that was the first time I'd been there. You must remember back then, when we left home, my father drove me up in a Model A Ford, and it took us 4 hours. 4 hours. Part of the road were dirt roads to get to Ashland. Well, when we drove upon the campus, the first person we saw was I started to say Sam Hatcher, Dr. Hatcher. We always called him Sam Hatcher. And he took us over to Wash Hall. His office was upstairs. They had no dean of admission in those days. He was the treasurer of the college and admitted kids. And we went up, and my father answered me, paid the tuition, and then he turned me over to a young man named Robert Epps Jones. He was a junior at that time, and he carried me around the campus. And in those days, they didn't furnish. You had to furnish your own room. You had to go buy furniture. They furnished a bed, that was all, and a desk. So Robert Epps knew all the angles, and we went and bought chairs and other things that was needed in the room. And walking around the campus at that time, there was two buildings that they had classes in. The library, 2 dormitories, the old gymnasium. They had one. I took French and Spanish in that, in the old gymnasium. I'm not talking about Crenshaw. I'm talking about the old gymnasium. Mm-hmm. And they just built the new gymnasium at that time. It had been 3 or 4 years. It impressed me that the school, it was small. It didn't extend across the track like it does now, and it was just it was more or less a home atmosphere, because I had been up and down the East Coast all my life with my father, who was a fisherman, and I had traveled a good bit. And it wasn't anything unusual for me. But the school, it was a beautiful campus those days, and in those days, freshmen had to wear a beanie. And you couldn't cut campus. You couldn't walk on the grass. That's been a long time ago. Gracious Ireka.
Now, you said earlier there were no scholarships. So
Not that I know of.
how did you afford a Randolph-Macon education, did you work?
You know what tuition was? $300. Now there was no dining hall.
Mm-hmm.
We ate in private homes. I ate with Ms. Lipscomb the whole 4 years I was there, and I waited tables my junior and senior years. But in the summertime, I always worked. Mm-hmm. I know the last year I was there, my father was a fisherman, and we were fishing out of Chincoteague. And that day, I think it was about the last of August, we made a big catch, and my share of the profit that day was enough to pay my way through school that year. The prior years, I'd worked down at the railway in Hampton, and I'd worked at Sam Watson, who was an electrician. Young men those days worked, and it didn't take a whole lot. See, there was no laundry there. We sent our laundry home, and my mom would send it back to me with $1 in it, which was my spending money for the week. A lot of changes.
Mm-hmm. And where did you live?
Where did I live?
Mm-hmm.
New dormitory on the, what do you call it now, Thomas Branch?
Thomas Branch.
I lived on the middle section of it, on the first floor, on the end room, 4 years.
Same room, 4 years?
Same room, 4 years.
That's unusual.
I had a private room. I didn't have a roommate. I had a private room. And there was, I think about it now, we were young people away from home, but we behaved ourselves. We had some water fights up and down the halls and things like that, but other than that, we monitored ourselves pretty good.
Now, we know you played baseball.
Yeah. I was very active in Wash Hall.
Okay.
That was one of the big things at Wash Hall and Frank Hall. On the nights that we met, some kid would go up and down the hall hollering, Wash Hall tonight, Frank Hall tonight. And there was a lot of competition between the two societies at that time. And I think I served as president that 1 year, and I know I was secretary for a couple of years. But I enjoyed that. And I remember now that Dr. Fox would come over a lot of times, and we'd have discussion about different things and debates. And it was a learning experience for a young kid raised in the country. Mm-hmm. Very, very, very learning experience.
So what kind of things would you talk about? They were academic discussions, social, political?
Well, the school I went to wasn't a first-class school, not like it is today. We weren't grounded very well in English and things like that. And I remember when we got there, we all went in the chapel, all the new students, and we had to write an essay. I didn't know what the hell how to write an essay. I hadn't been taught anything in high school like that. And you were put in the English. English was the thing that you had to pass. Everybody dreaded first English. And I happened to get a man named Aldrich, who was my professor. He didn't have his doctor, he had his master's. And I think the only reason I passed English because my first name was Aldrich and his last name was Aldrich. But I got through that, and then I was in history. I took history. No, I didn't take history. I took English, math, physics, and chemistry my first year. But it was, you have to, in a sense, go back, and it's hard for you to understand what things were like back in those days. There was no automobiles on the campus. We walked everywhere we went. And none of us had any money. Most of us were country boys. A large percentage of the kids at that time would come from the northern neck of in that area, and the eastern shore of Virginia, and out of the western part of the state. I know we'll forget Jim Robinson. he was the first friend I made after I got there. And we were sitting on the steps of the wash hall one day, and he told me, he said, when he got here, he was sitting there, and Dr. Hatcher come up. He said, young man, have you matriculated? No, says, I'd like to. I haven't been since I left home. That was the difference in children today and children now. You know what I mean? They just didn't have the training that they get today. Makes a big difference. I enjoyed my years there. I really did. I think back on it, about the friends we made. They're all gone too. That's the trouble. But next door to me was a boy named Gerald Taylor who lived on the Eastern Shore. He lived in that room 3 years. He was a year ahead of me. And then there was Buck Brockwell, and I don't know, the whole group. And my sophomore year, 2 young men from Macon came there. A boy by the name of Woodrow Toppin and a boy by the name of Robert Forrest, both going into ministry. Robert eventually went into ministry. Woodrow didn't. And that was companionship too, because it was somebody from home. Somebody from home. You know, today Betsy gets in a car and drives up to, she went to Radford, she drives by and thinks nothing about it. When I come home, you got on the highway and put your thumb up and got a ride home. You didn't have money to pay your way home. I know it must be hard for young people today to understand what things were like in those days. I enjoyed it though. I loved every minute of it.
What about faculty members or administration people? You've mentioned
Well,
Dr. Hatcher.
at that time, there was Dr. Canna and Dr. Updike in the chemistry department, Dr. Mac Simpson math, Dr. Fox history, Billy Keeble in physics, Dr. Webb in English, and Dr. Blackwell taught a class. He taught class in Shakespeare. And Dr. Day, that was the faculty. Later on, McNeil come in and helped Mac Simpson. But the class was only about 35. Excuse me just a minute.
Just start it back up.
But the faculty was small, and we were close to the faculty. You know, I never will forget, my father and mother never went through high school. Well, when we drove up there, and when they were getting ready to leave, Dr. Blackwell walked up to my father and said, "Are you going to Richmond?" My daddy said, "Yeah." He said, "Would you mind me riding over with you?" And when they got to Richmond, Dr. Blackwell took time. My mother had never been in Richmond. Took the time to guide them for a guided tour through the capital. That was a relationship that existed between the people there. In chemistry, I took first year chemistry and doing well the first quarter. Second quarter, I was failing. One morning, Dr. Canna said, "Forrest, after class day," and I thought I was coming home. Says, "You can't see." I said, "Sir?" Says, "You can't see." Everything was on the blackboard. "I've made an appointment with you as a doctor in Richmond. Have your eyes examined." I went over, had my eyes examined, and I've worn glasses since. That was a feeling between faculty and the students that you don't see in the large schools today. And that bothers me, because there was a personal relationship. They looked after us. If we were having trouble in classes, we had tutors. And that's the only way I've got through there, frankly. Changes. Obama talks about changes. He doesn't know what changes are.
How did you decide on your major?
I fell in love with Dr. Canna, and I'd had chemistry under Mr. Toppin at high school, and I loved it. I loved it. But you must remember, when I graduated in 1932, it was the height of the Depression. I walked the streets of Richmond looking for a job, the streets of Norfolk looking for a job, and resumes everywhere you could find. There was no work. Most of the kids that graduated when I did, unless they had family connection with some corporation or something like that, either went into teaching or the ministry. And that's the way it was. My father had opened a place in Petersburg, and after I tried to couldn't find work, he said, "Come on, go with me." And I worked in Petersburg 2 years with him, and enjoyed every minute of it, because we lived on a boat, and it was a very successful business, and I love people to start with. I love to talk, and while there, contacting the Hotel Petersburg and the restaurants and all that, and Walnut Hill was just as glory at that time. And the people I learned to know, like the Romains that graduated from Randolph-Macon, Ms. Romain would invite me up to home for dinner, and it was just a. I think back on it now. The North and Western Railroad went right by where we were tied up at the dock. And I have seen more people on the coal trains bumming, hoboing, than would ride the passenger trains. I never will forget, we was one evening, 4 or 5 young men got off a coal train and come down to the dock. There was a water fountain there. And we had a big cage anchor. You don't know what it is, but it looks like it has where you anchor a boat with, weighed about 500 pounds. And one of them looked at it and said, "The biggest damn coal pick I ever saw in my life." That was tough times. I don't want to see that anymore.
So following graduation, you worked for your father for a couple of years.
2 years. Then in '35, my brother-in-law opened a seafood business in Hampton, Hawkins and Forrest. And we operated, he died in '41, and I operated it by myself. And in '43, I bought property over on Sunset Creek, which is a tributary of Hampton Creek, and built a plant over there. And at that time, I was having some serious health problems. And I took a young man in named Ralph Marshall, who was from Chrisfield, and we changed the name to Hampton Road Seafood in 61 or 62, I don't remember. And we were very successful. He loved to work the plant. I loved to get on the road, and I traveled. Because in those days, you didn't have the internet. When you used a telephone, you got an operator to make a long-distance call. So I got on the road, and I worked. We covered everything east of the Mississippi River. I would start in Buffalo and be all the way down to Mobile or New Orleans and that area, Galveston. And we built up quite a business by doing that. And Ralph ran the business more or less. I was on the road, and I enjoyed it. I love to talk to people, and you meet a lot of people. Meet a lot of people like that.
Did you stay in touch with Randolph-Macon after graduation?
No, I didn't for the first 20 years. I was too doggone busy trying to make a living. But I can't remember the man's name now. He eventually moved to Salem. He had some kind of a job like you've got now. I used to hear from him, but I don't anymore. But he come to the office one day, and we got to talking, and he talked me out of a little bit of money. And then in the year they had the 53 union, the old grads, that really got me started. I never will forget, I'd had cancer, and my doctor told me, he said, "You'll get 5 years." I said, "I'm going to get more than that. I want to go to the old grads." That's been 30-some years ago.
Wow.
And I went to the old grads, and I fell in love with a man there named Ladell Payne. And he had more influence on me than anybody I'd ever met at the college, except when I was a student. And we got to be good friends. Ladell would come down here, he and his wife, and you and Mike, and we would go out to lunch. And I never forget one day, we'd been to lunch, and he come back, and he was walking down the way. He's just so peaceful and quiet. But Laydale had more influence on me, and at that time, my daughter was teaching school in Hampton, and she'd come home and tell me, "Daddy, there's so many kids that need to go to school that can't afford it." And I well remember the first kid I took up there was one of her students, and we had lunch with Dr. Payne, and he was admitted. Smart as a steel trap. And from then on, I watched the kids at church that I knew, and the young people that she would tell me that she was teaching that needed to go to college. And most every year after that, I'd take 4 or 5 of them up there. Got to be good friend with John Cronkite, and he would take some, and some I thought he ought to take, he wouldn't take. I never understood why. But over the years, I think Liddell influenced me more than anybody else. I thought the world of Dr. Moreland. I knew him very well, but Liddell had a way of doing things that I really liked, and I set scholarship up. I was going to wait a year or two because I think I gave stock and I thought it was going to go up, but he was leaving, and I thought to myself, I'm going to make that a legacy for him, and Margaret and myself decided we'd do it then. The thing that bothers me, they didn't do as well with it as I did. It's an irrevocable trust, and Bill Vinson, who advises me sometime, we were handling it. Of course, I was doing it myself mostly, and we were doing very well. But he had to leave his job, and he couldn't do it anymore. And I turned it over to the school. They lost about $40,000 in about 3 years. But it's doing all right. And you know, when you watch a kid walk across the stage and get his diploma, it's a thrill. And I always get a note from the kids that had the scholarship that I give, and you appreciate that. You get older, things like that mean a lot to you.
Is your scholarship geared to a certain student, or is it?
It's the scholarship I gave is limited to the peninsula and Norfolk and Virginia Beach area around this area. I think the young kid has it this year from Virginia Beach. And we've had a lot of children from the coast and go to Randolph-Macon. A lot. I mean, my brother went there, and recently a young boy named Jordan that graduated last year, a year before, I don't remember which. I don't think there's ever a year that there was 1 or 2 kids from the coast to go to Randolph-Macon. Randolph-Macon's biggest competition here is VPI. Those kids from VPI, that football team means a whole lot to them.
Having watched Randolph-Macon all these years, what would you think is the biggest change? Or biggest changes?
Well, there's been a tremendous change in the physical plant. And I read the magazine that you send me about once a quarter, something like that. And I watch the things the kids are doing there, and it impresses me. They're going out and helping other people. It's changed so much. Now they travel in foreign countries. It wasn't thought of in my day. And I've watched the young kid like Chuck up here. I went to him the other day, and when I left, he said, I had good training. He held his hand up and showed me his ring. It meant a lot to me. To see young kids like that, Chuck's, I guess, about 33, 30, maybe 35 years old. And I've watched other kids that live in the community that went there. They've done well. You take Olin Evans that graduated as a principal of school here for a number of years. John Benny Graham has been very successful in the seafood business. And most of the kids have done very well. the physical plan has changed. I haven't been up there, what, about 4 years? Been right around 4 years. I can't travel anymore. And last time I was there, Susan carried me all over the new Brock building. That's quite something. And to think back when we were there, had that little gymnasium, and then later on the other gymnasium had a swimming pool in it. That was something unusual for a country boy. But you know, I think back when I went there, the kids that go there, they're different. We were all from rural communities, mostly. Good many from Richmond. A lot of boys from Richmond, and Hanover County went there. One of my best friends was Monroe Splicer, who went on to become head of the chemistry department at Georgia Tech. Lived in Hanover, was a day student. Willie King, one of the outstanding basketball players, lived in Richmond. Fess Woodson, I think he lived on campus. Became principal of high school in Portsmouth. And it was just, we were a community. When we walked down the campus, if you saw somebody, you always said, "Gentlemen." That's the way you greeted them. You spoke to everybody you passed on the campus. And Ashland then was a little town, small town. I don't think there was a rest in Ashland. And the only place that we'd hang out was a pool parlor. We hung out there a good bit, a lot of us, and played pool. And I think about that now. It was more like where I was raised, the atmosphere, if you see what I mean. Mm-hmm. It was. We were all, 90% of the boys there were raised in rural areas. I never will forget Frank Taylor Carmine said the reason he went to Randolph-Macon was that you may not understand what I'm saying, but when you raise corn, you pull the leaves off and make feed for the cattle. The reason he went around Randolph-Macon was he never had to want to do that again in his life, because in the summertime it was the hardest job he had in his life. And I think back now, when I sent Betsy, I wanted her to go around, but she wanted to be a teacher, and she wanted to go to Radford. She went to Radford. But the liberal arts education is the main thing, I think. That I will never forget a friend of mine that was with Cooper's Lineman. What's his name?
Cooper Bell.
Huh?
Cooper Bell.
No, not Cooper. With an accountant. Lives in Richmond with one of the large accounting firms. Oh, I'll tell you tomorrow. But anyway, he told me, he said, "You know, I hired a kid from VPI as an accountant. Smartest kid I ever had in my life, but didn't know how to speak, didn't know how to write a letter. Had to send him to school." He missed that liberal arts education, and that's what counts. Randolph-Macon has changed, my dear, from what it was when I was there. 300 kids then, what, 1,500 now?
Not quite.
There was no girl. To show you how different it is now, there was a girl named Red that lived right around that went school, and she took biology under Dr. Bulletin. And I never will forget, we were studying the sex lives of different species, and every time he talked about it, he blushed. That's how times have changed. Bugs Bulletin, we always had a nickname for him. But I think back now, I'd like to live it over again. But I've made some good friends up there, and I'd let's forget back, but the years do something to you. I'll be 97 years old in July. That's almost a century.
Almost.
It's hard to believe the changes I've seen, not only where we live, but at Randolph-Macon and in the whole business world. Hard to believe. Sometimes I wish I could write. I'd write a history of it, but I can't write anymore. I know I never could write very well. I took Spanish under, what was that man's name? I know he gave the exam papers. We were on quarter system then. And he gave them all those. So I got one I can't read the name on. I said, "Did it pass?" He said, "Yes." I said, "That's mine." But we've had a good life. My wife went to Mary Washington, and in those days I'd go up to see her. We'd get on an old number one and thumb a ride up, and she couldn't go off campus. No, no, no. And you had to see Ms. Bushnell before you could see her. She was Dean of Women. And then we'd get a ride back to Ashland and probably have 50 cents to go up there with, get a meal for a quarter, and change our shirts in the hotel, turn them wrong side out or something like that. Different times. Now every kid on the campus got a car, hadn't it?
Feels that way. When you're trying to park in the morning, it feels that way.
I think there was 2 automobiles when I was there. And one of the biggest changes I saw while I was there, I hadn't thought about that. When I first, Gus Welch was athletic director and coach. And he was rough as a cob. And my 3rd year, they brought a man named Norman Shepard come in there as coach, athletic director. And he brought in probably 15 or 20 boys from New Jersey. Good football players. But they were mostly of Portuguese or Italian descent. But they could play football. And we beat Richmond that year. That's the only time I remember we beat University. You know, I think back now. When I was there, we played the University of Virginia football. I'll never forget Buck Brockwell played guard. He weighed about 160 pounds. And one Sunday morning, he come in my room, he was beat up. I said, "What's the matter?" I said, "Them boys so much bigger, so they beat the hell out of us." Now, at that time, VPI had about 3,000 kids. The university probably had about that many. Now look at it now. Changes. How's politics on a campus? How are the young people up there voting?
The young people we have right now are actually very conservative.
Are they all conservative?
When we do the mock polls and things, mock elections, the students vote much more conservatively, much more Republican than the faculty and staff.
Good. Glad of that.
So, we haven't done that yet this year.
What year did you graduate from Randolph-Macon?
1984.
84. Soon I'm getting old. What have you been there, about 30 years?
Mm-hmm. 30 years and about 6,
I expect
8 months.
2 people that had more influence on me in helping Randolph-Macon have been Susan Donovan and Lady L. Payne. Susan is a member of our family and has been for a long time, and don't you think we don't love her. It's been a wonderful, wonderful trip down the road. A wonderful trip. Do you go to Randolph-Macon?
No, I've been there just about 3 years working, but I've been to some other
What is the
places.
percentage of boys to girls there now?
Right now, it's about 55% female now.
Do you have?
It's not unique just to Randolph-Macon Shem. This is a nationwide trend.
And there are more women in college than men.
Is there many kids there studying for the ministry now?
Not as many as when you were a student. It's far fewer.
Mm-hmm. But more than when I was.
Well, you know, when I was there, they had a group called the Clericus
Mm-hmm.
that was ministerial students. They weren't fraternity members, but they had a group that called the Clericus. And they had a little place out on there was a building out there, a little restaurant, and they had a room off the side, and that's where they met. You know, that's a long time ago. Very good. But what we've done for the school, we've done because we think a lot of young people is the future of the country. And It bothers me today somewhat that the schools don't have the influence on children they had when I come along. That's my daughter taught for 34 years, and she started to substitute, and she quit. She said, "I just can't take it, Daddy. You can't correct them anymore." It's something wrong down the road where authority doesn't mean it. We were talking last night about motivation. I said, Betsy, the biggest motivation is fear. That's my motivation for getting through college. Because if I come home, I knew what was happening. My daddy wouldn't like it, and my mama wouldn't either. Fear is a great motivator, whether people know it or not. And it's not there anymore. You take in this area, we're trouble with gangs.
Out here?
You'd be surprised. You'd be surprised. I have a source of good information. A young couple that live over in this house here. He's worked for me for, I guess, 30 years, and his wife is our companion. She comes in every day and stays with us. My wife's in a wheelchair. She can't has to go to the bathroom or take a bath. You know her very well, and she's the nicest person. But Charlie tells me all goes on, what goes on around. It, I don't know. I just hope. You know what bothered me in the magazine last time? Was the giving of the alumni. Why?
Jim, in the last 5 to 7 years, there has not been the emphasis on funding positions or programming that needed to be done in order to do the outreach necessary. There have been some frozen budgets. What's happened in this past year is that's changing, and we're starting to see a major
A little louder,
increase.
Susan.
What we're seeing now is a major increase in the number of people that are making donations. In fact, right now at this point, we are almost at the level of donations that we were for all of last year. We're also now able to get out on the road and do a lot of the engaging. All these receptions that we're doing with the president right now, they're having a major impact. He's doing a great job in getting out and meeting the people.
Because, you know, I think when I was working with the old grads, about 60% of the alumni contributes to the college. I noticed in this magazine, it's down to 6%. There's something wrong somewhere down the road. Somebody didn't do a job. I'm not talking about you, but in administrations, or do they forget?
I think on occasion people forget because they are not periodically reminded of what took place and what the college gave them. We all get busy in our own lives doing other things, and if there's not something to remind us of that connection, it tends to become thin. And what we're trying to do now is re-engage those people.
Well, you're doing a good job. You had a good crowd over at the Peninsula meeting the other night.
We did.
And I know a lot of kids from the coast and that was probably there. And I never see where they're giving their money. It bothers me. You take more boys, Alfred and his brother. Well, money means a whole lot to some people. They have a dip. It becomes almost an obsession with them. Never bothered me. If I had it, I had it. If I didn't have it, it didn't bother me. I knew I was going to make a living somewhere or other. And why? I don't understand why they don't support school more than they do. I just don't understand it. Because what they're doing, they were trained at Randolph-Macon to do. Well, I can preach a sermon if you want me to.
Did I
Jim, I do have one question. Were there any of the traditions at Randolph-Macon when you were a student?
Was any what?
Any traditions at Randolph-Macon that you remember that were special to you? Any type of traditions that the students did certain things or anything of that nature?
No, nothing. You know, Susan, we were a family. There was no cliques or anything like that. I mean, you take Jack Fisher was son of Dr. Fisher who taught French. He ate the same board, Dr. Fisher ate the same boarding house I did. And Jack Fisher and myself were good friends until he passed away. And I never will forget, after Dr. Fisher moved to William and Mary, and Jack stayed there and lived over top of upstairs in Dr. Updike's home. And we made home brew up there. And one night it popped off and we got caught. But there was nothing done about it. But see, that was prohibition those days. You couldn't have alcohol on the campus. There was no beer or anything like that. And in the chemistry lab, we would, you allowed so much grain alcohol to do an experiment, but there was always a flask sitting by that you put a drop or two in, and we'd accumulate a little bit along. Then we would go to Richmond and get a bottle of rum flavoring or something like that and mix it, and we'd have a drink once in a while. But there was no drinking on the campus. There was no drinking on the campus. I don't ever remember seeing anybody drinking on the campus or drunk. Nobody. And you know, when we went to class, we dressed.
Mhm.
We put a coat and tie on. Now, last time I was up there, they don't dress very well, in my way of thinking, but it's all right. It's their way of living, I understand that. Betsy bothers me sometimes, the way she goes. And she's 62 years old. But I guess over time you learn to adjust. We've had a good life. Margaret and myself have been married 72 years this July.
Wow.
That's a long time.
That's a long
People
time.
ask me how we stayed together so long. I said, I built my garage a long ways from the house. And when things get real rough, that's where I go. I can't do it anymore. But it's been a lot of changes. But Randolph-Macon has meant a lot to me. It really gave me the confidence and the ability to go in somebody's office and sit down and know I was on their level with them. I was just as well educated as they were. And when you go into New York, in the market there, those men up there that in Fulton Market, every one of them college graduates. And Sam Traeger, a good friend of mine, was a lawyer, but ran a fish market in Fulton Fish Market. Another one was, can't call his name right offhand. He had a son in the Foreign Service. Good many of them were Jewish. And I got to be good friends with them. And you know, in Pittsburgh, I used to travel to Pittsburgh. Uncle Morris ran a live fish company. And he'd take me in his home, rather than go in a hotel. And in those days in Pittsburgh, when you went in the morning, if you had a white shirt on, you had to change it in the evening because it'd be black. It was a manufacturing town.
Mm-hmm.
But Randolph-Macon gave me that self-confidence, I suppose is a word, to go in anybody's office, sit down and talk to them, you try to get their business, explain what I was doing, and I had the ability to do it. Can't do it anymore. Sometimes my tongue gets twisted up, and I can't remember like I used to either. But I'd still like to get back on the road. I enjoyed every minute of it. Enjoyed every minute of it. You're all doing a good job up there.
Thank you.
You're doing a good job. And I think this man you've got president now is going to do an excellent job. But I never will forget Lady L. Payne. You remember him?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Doing well.
He was he had the school at heart. There's one thing that has bothered me a bit, and maybe I'm wrong. I think the school has got away from the church a little bit on the pain, more than it should have. I think it'll come back now. Martin brought it back to a certain extent. And Martin was a good man, but I don't think he had. I don't think he was. I don't think he had the drive that some of the others had. You take Dr. Moreland. If you ever went there and you went back again, he knew you by your first name. And I thought the world of Dr. Martin. He'd been here a lot of time with you, and we've been out to lunch together. But of all of them, Liddell was my idol. Liddell was my idol. Well, anything else you want to ask me?
Well, I just have one question.
Oh.
We have several pictures of the old library, but there's never any students in the pictures. Did you ever study in the library, or did you study in your rooms, or?
Both. I love to read. I spent more time in the library than I did in my room. And often, downstairs in the library, the old magazines, like the Saturday Evening Post and Collier's, down in the basement, I spent more time down there than I did upstairs studying my lessons. But who was the librarian then? Can't think of her name. But we spent a lot of time in the library.
Was it Flavia then? No,
No,
that
it
was
would've been
much
Miss-
later.
Miss Sidner?
She was Dr. Webb's wife.
Oh, okay. I remember someone telling me about that.
She was
but I don't
Dr. Webb's
remember her
wife.
name.
But
She's in here.
it was
Mrs. Haley.
Haley.
Haley's wife.
Dr. Haley's wife, yeah, that's right. That's right. But, you know, that library was new when I went there. I hadn't been there very long. And that was where we would go night study. And in our room, too. We studied in our room, too. But there was no mimeographs or anything like that in those days. I mean, you took notes, and if you didn't take your notes and bring them in your room and write them up again and study them, you were in trouble the next day. They go somewhere. Betts is very active in the theater, over community theater, and Ellen is too, and they pal around a lot. Something else you want to ask me?
Actually, I had a question about, in the yearbook they list you as an instructor in chemistry.
Yeah.
What did that mean?
Well, the old lab, you don't remember it, but Dr. Canna would have instructors, when you've done the lab work, a student, to go around and help kids with their, how to set it up and things like that. And I think I got maybe $25 a year, something like that, for doing that. And I enjoyed it. And you'd help, the freshmen would come in, and some of them never had chemistry before in their life. And setting up the Bunsen burners and things like that, you had to show them how. And that was what the instructor was. And my senior year, when I graduated, Dr. Canna asked me if I'd stay a week and straighten up the storeroom. And I got $5 for that. And I stayed a week and straightened up made an inventory of what was in the storeroom. I think of him now. He was a big man. Had 4 or 5 pair of glasses. You didn't have a textbook in his class. No textbook. And everything was on a blackboard. And he had changed glasses 2 or 3 times. Then he taught men's Bible class at Duncan Memorial and played the organ. And if you didn't go to church on Sunday, if you were in his class, you were in a little bit of trouble on Monday. And in those days, we didn't have, something else comes to mind. We didn't have dances on the campus in those days. We had them down at the Armory. And I can remember Dr. Fox as good as yesterday. If you had been at that dance the night before, the weekend before, and you'd been just a little bit up, you got picked on that morning in class. I mean, you really got run over all over. And he would pick out one person. He would pick one person through that whole class and badger him with questions. But I thought the world, he could bring history to life. He was killed in an accident. And Dr. Day taught Bible. And you know, you think back on the things that come to mind. I remember Dr. Webb in English. And I don't know what we were studying the English poets one time. And I don't know how the discussion come up. But he said, I'll tell you one thing. We were talking about revolutions in where the things were written in those days. He said there was one man that created the greatest revolution that ever was Jesus Christ. So of all the revolutions that would happen in this world, that was the greatest. And you stop to think it was. It was. And things like that, you don't have a lot of time to sit and reminisce when you can't get around. And I sit here a lot, and sometimes those things will come to mind. I sit here and think about them. I have a lot of hobbies. I did. I love to build boats. You know how long it takes to build one of those?
No idea.
1 year. I loved working wood. That was when I would come from the office and was tired. I've got a nice shop. I could go in there and relax doing woodwork. And see, there was no television, there was no radio. We had a radio in college. We made ourselves an oatmeal box and some transistors or something on. And I think back now, families we visited in rural areas. On a Sunday, my mother and father took me to my grandfather or grandmother and grandmother on each side one Sunday. You don't do that anymore. You stay home and watch football. There's something lost somewhere along the way. What it is, I don't know. But it bothers me. And you take it nice. Margaret myself. Now, my wife's a little bit confused. She's not, as Susan knows, not the woman she used to be. But we sit here and talk about things like that. And she lives in the past a lot. And I sit and say yes and no, but that's all right. I don't mind doing it. But then we watched last night. We sat up till about 11 o'clock. I want to see how the election was going. And we get up about 8, 9 o'clock in the morning, and Betsy fixes our breakfast, and Stormy comes in, and we're doing all right. I'm trying to make 100. I don't know whether I'm going to do it or not, but I'm shooting at it. Got 3 more years to go. Margaret will be 98 in June, and we're going to be here a while yet, I hope.
We hope.
Lucille's doing all right.
Good.
I talk to her every day, and Donnie comes by, you know, Sandra's husband. He's a ray of sunshine when he comes in. And but I think back on my days at Randolph-Macon, they were really the foundation of what I am today. The success I've been. And I've had my failures. I've been as broke as you can get. But I've always come back. And I've always attributed to the fact that it gave me an understanding of what must be done to be successful. And my brother was the same way. You didn't know him. But he finished, I can't remember what year.
39.
But I know when he got out, he couldn't get a job. Well, I knew he had a shipyard, Newport News Shipbuilding Rider Company, so he got a job, and he worked there about 2 or 3 years. Then a friend of mine had a seafood business, and he wanted somebody to take it over, and GS took it over, and ran it, was very successful. But life goes on. You take it day to day, that's all you can do. And if any way I can help you up there, I'll do it. And one of these days when we're gone, somebody will get a little bit of money from us, if it's any left. You know, it bothers me what it costs a kid to go to school today. And I don't know any way out of it. $300, what is it, 38, 32, 33,000 now?
It's around 36.
In 80 years, from $300 to 30-some thousand. I was thinking, I ate with Ms. Lipscomb 3 meals a day, 7 days a week. You know what it cost? $20. $20.
Year, a month.
3 meals a day, 7 days a week, $20. And we had good food. Of course, the soup was always thickened with the oatmeal that was left over from breakfast, but it was good food for $20. I don't know. Any other questions you'd like to ask me, young lady?
Can't think of
Have
anything
I
specific.
give you some idea what Randolph-Macon was like?
Yes.
Absolutely.
Very interesting, and we
It-
really do appreciate your time very much.
You know, I think back on it now, the friends we made there then, they were lifelong friends. Like Jack Taylor lives over the Eastern Shore. I think Jack died recently. Buck Brockle, who went on to be superintendent of Suffolk Schools. Doug Williams, who was our pastor here for a year or two. And Lewis Morgan. I can't help but laugh at Lewis. Lewis had 2 daughters went around Macon. He said one day, he said, Shim, I got a pipeline running up there. I said, what do you mean? All it is the money just flowing through it. But we've had a good life, Susan, and we've had good friends. Good friends. We have a lot of company. People come in, and we enjoy life. And I think back on it now that I hope the kids are doing the same thing we did. I never did belong to a fraternity, didn't have money enough. And I never will forget Racket Doyle, who went on to become, I think, head of the English department in Clemson. We were back at an old grad reunion. We were sitting, he said, did you have a college ring? I said, heck, college ring? I didn't have money enough to buy a college ring. He said, I didn't either. And there was a lot of boys from Dinwiddie at that time that went to Randolph-Macon. And they were good times. You know, a youngster today that doesn't enjoy going to college is missing something, because in a small school particularly, there's a feeling of family. Like I told you a while ago, when you pass somebody on, you said gentlemen. I knew every man on the campus. Every man on the campus. And for recreation, you could go to the movies for a quarter. You could go to Richmond and go to the old National Theater. They had a floor show there, and we'd go there. And I had an uncle who was principal of Forrest Elementary School over in Hampton, come up and see me, and he took me over to Barry Burke and bought me a full suit of clothes. And that was something unusual in those days. And you remember what I remember about them? They were long trousers and knickers, too. Young men wore knickers those days, top. It brings back a lot of memories, a lot of memories.
Now, you mentioned your wife is a Mary Washington girl.
Yeah.
Did you know each other before you went to school?
We started dating when we were juniors in high school.
Okay. Now, was her choice of Mary Washington because you went to Randolph-Macon?
No,
Since
no.
The two have been
She had
connected
four.
that way.
She had 4 sisters who went to Mary Washington. Her oldest sister was the first, and then it was Carrie, Lenore, and Margaret. And her brother went to VPI. And we started I was born down in the Messick area, down on Coastal Avenue. And, then I walked up here. You could only date on Friday night, Saturday night and Sunday night in those days. And I would walk, it's about 2 miles, walk up here. And at 11 o'clock, Mrs. Freeman called bedtime, and I got up and walked back home. I couldn't help laugh the other night. We had to have the emergency here for Margaret, take her over to the hospital, and the young boy here had to live about 2 doors where I was born. And we got talking, and he said, "You walked?" I said, "That's the only way I had to get up there was walk." I think back now, when we were married, I had $100. A 1932 Plymouth automobile. We were married by a friend of ours in Emporia. We spent one night in Richmond, 2 nights up in the Valley of Virginia, 2 nights in Washington, and 1 night in Annapolis. And when I got home, I had $5 on $100. Do you ever listen to Channel 45, that's the U.S. Senate?
On occasion.
Well, I do. I guess so. They're arguing the budget up there right now. That crowd of, I don't know. But, I don't think people realize the danger we live in today. This Middle East situation, the terrorists, it's hard for me to understand the hatred that exists in the world today. We don't do it here. Why is it? I don't know. And it's almost become a religious war. And in fact, it is a religious war. And it bothers me. But we've been through it before. I've lived through, let's see, World War I, World War II, Vietnam, Korea, and now this one. I've lived through 6 presidents of Randolph-Macon. 6 presidents of Randolph-Macon. And the only one I didn't like was Luther White. I couldn't stand him. And I knew him very well too, because he was born in Norfolk and lived down in Willoughby, and I had an uncle live right 2 doors from him. But I know I went up there one time, I never will forget it. That was before I became active. They were having homecoming. Margaret and myself went. And he approached me, he said, somebody had written him a letter about, they'd had the heavyweight, Ali, what is his name?
Muhammad Ali, catching
Speak
play
there.
at that time.
And he said, somebody had written it. And he got me and raised the devil because somebody objected to it. Thought it was me. Well, I pretty well told him off, and I didn't go back up there much after that. Until the old grads, and I got to know you real well, and you brought me back. But a lot of changes. That's them. Margaret will be here in a few minutes. I want you all to meet them.
Fabulous.
And
We're done.
Thank you so
Thank you.
very much.
well, I don't know whether I've told you anything's worthwhile or not,
Oh, yes.
but it's just remembering. That's all I can do. I don't think as clearly as I used to, but I still handle my finances. And Betsy helped me a little bit. I'm trying to train her, but she's so doggone careless, it aggravates the devil out of me.